If you're here today, it's likely that you've already heard about climate change. You probably know of it as a bad thing that is going to cause us lots of harm, brought about by a century of burning fossil fuels and destabilizing the global carbon cycle. However, no matter how well informed you are surely not alarmed enough. It's not just that the planet is warming, it's that it's in crisis. When we talk about climate change, the language is usually centered around environmental degradation and is phrased in a way that somehow removes humans from those that will be harmed by it. Today I'm not talking about the fact that wildlife abundance has decreased by 60% since the 1970s, or about how we're in the 6th largest mass extinction ever with species dying off at 1,000 times the normal background extinction rate. I'm talking about how our species will be affected by this self-inflicted crisis. Climate change could mean the end of our own species. So, when will the Earth be too hot for humans? Our original goal under the Paris Climate Accords was to avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which would have already allowed for catastrophic changes. Now our goal is to not pass a 2 degrees Celsius change in global temperatures, but it's likely that we won't be able to. If we continue to emit carbon as we are, it's expected by the start of the next century we could hit anywhere from 4 to 8 degrees Celsius of warming. One of the main consequences of climate destabilization that we talk about is sea level rise, and this is for good reason. The global sea level has risen an approximate 8 to 9 inches in the past 140 years, and almost a third of this change has happened in the past 25 years. It's currently rising at 2.5 times the normal historical rate. Sea levels are rising due to anthropogenic change, which has caused much of our land ice to melt, and a phenomenon called thermal expansion, which is when water expands in size as it gets warmer. Now, this is bad news for us when considering that 8 of the world's 10 largest cities are along the coast, and that 40% of the US population lives in a coastal area that may be vulnerable to sea level rise. So it makes a lot of sense why the topic has dominated the conversation about the threats we will face in coming years. Rising oceans are bad. In fact, very bad. But fleeing the coastline will not be enough. The coming changes are going to be much worse than just sea level rise. The following scenarios are examples of what could happen to the planet without collaborative and aggressive action. First, let's talk about heat death. Like all mammals, we need to continually cool down, or else we would overheat and die. In order for us to be able to cool down, the air around us must be cool enough to act as a refrigerant. Rising global temperatures will make large areas of Earth uninhabitable, especially in more humid places due to the fact that humidity raises the likelihood of heat stress. In the jungles of Costa Rica, for instance, where humidity routinely tops 90%, simply moving around outside when it's over 105 degrees Fahrenheit would be lethal, and the effect would be fast. Within a few hours, a human body would be cooked to death from both inside and out. But we don't need to look to the future to see the damage caused by rising temperatures. In the Sugarcane region of El Salvador, as much as 1/5 of the population has chronic kidney disease, including over a quarter of the men, the presumed result of dehydration from working the fields they were able to comfortably harvest as recently as 2 decades ago. With dialysis, which is expensive, those with kidney failure can expect to live 5 years. Without it, life expectancy is in the weeks. The 5 warmest years on record since at least 1880 have been 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, and this is only continuing. Even if we stop global temperature change at 2 degrees warming, many cities in Southwest Asia and the Persian Gulf will become virtually uninhabitable, and the deadly heat waves like those that occurred in 2015 in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Iran will become annual. At 11 or 12 degrees of warming, more than half the world's population, as distributed today, would die of direct heat. Although we won't reach 11 or 12 degrees warming this century, models that predict future warming bring us there eventually if we continue to burn fossil fuels as we do. Let's talk about our food. For every degree that the planet warms, the yields of staple cereal crops will decline by at least 10%, although some estimates say the decline will be as high as at least 17%. If the planet is 5 degrees warmer at the end of the century, we may have as many as 50% more people to feed and 50% less grain to give them. How will climate change affect our economy? For each degree of warming that there is, it is expected to cost 1.2% of GDP. There is a 12% chance that climate change will reduce global output by more than 50% by 2100, they say, and a 51% chance that it lowers per capita GDP by 20% or more by then, unless emissions decline. The scale of that economic devastation is hard to comprehend, but you can start by imagining what the world would look like today with an economy half as big, which would produce only half as much value, generating only half as much to offer the workers of the world. Our oceans play a huge role in mediating the effects of climate change. They act as a carbon sink and absorb a third of the carbon that we emit. However, as the oceans absorb carbon, their pH gets lower, causing what is known as ocean acidification. In acid waters, oysters and mussels will struggle to grow their shells and create large dead zones where anaerobic bacteria thrives, suffocating any oxygen-dependent life. More acidic waters are also warmer, and warming waters are also the lead cause of coral bleaching. This happens when corals expel the algae that usually lives in their tissues, and the IPCC has labeled coral bleaching to be the lead threat to the world's reef ecosystems. But preserving our oceanic life is essential to preserving human life, as seafood provides about 43% of the global population with at least a fifth of their animal protein. So why am I telling you all of this? One reason is to make you aware of the urgency and severity of this crisis. It demands our full attention. It is also to encourage you to vote for political officials who recognize this urgency and fight for our common interest. But I encourage you to remain hopeful. When I say hope, I don't mean blind optimism, and I don't mean the belief that everything was, is, or will be fine. Although things will get worse, we have a small window to reduce the amount of negative change brought on by the Anthropocene. For the people who don't understand or refuse to understand the severity of the climate crisis, a more rudimentary understanding of hope makes the present situation worse. Being overly optimistic can lead people to believe that things in the foreseeable future are not going to get worse, maybe even that they will improve. However, this is sadly not the truth. To some it may seem ironic, but we must remain hopeful. The hope that we need must be pragmatic, or else it will do more harm than good. As in the words of Dr. David Suzuki, you have no choice. Do you give up? I think it's hard to give in to despair, but there are a lot of people who are despairing. We've all got to do our little bit, whatever it is. Actually doing something invigorates you. It makes you feel better to be doing something. We must stay encouraged to continue to fight for our planet, inspire others, and live sustainably because we cannot simply give up. We must do what we can while it's not too late.